computer. Cool. So y'all asked to talk a little bit about creating a new React app. So I'll walk through the process of doing that, and that should be pretty straightforward. We'll talk through what all it's doing, troubleshoot if anyone's having any troubles, answer questions, and the rest of the time I can just kind of talk about any React stuff you want answers to because I know some React stuff. Before we get into it, is there anything in particular about the creating of the React app that folks are having trouble with or want to focus on?
So I notice when I run the npx and I forget the rest of the command off the top of my head, but the npx create React app or something like that,
Mhm.
it produces like a pile of files. And I know that some of them are very clearly going to be important, but I'm also pretty certain that not all of them are. Some of them might be fluff or like bloat files that it adds to your thing to as defaults maybe. And I
Mhm.
just don't know which of those files are important and which ones I could basically just purge out and put my
Yeah,
own stuff in their place.
great, great. Yeah. So I'm going to share my screen and we will make some stuff and talk about it. And I'll move all of the buttons and windows where they belong. And controls. Great. Cool. So I have this is my repo directory here. hmm And so I can create a new React app. I think, I don't think they let you do it just by doing create React app anymore. You could do a npm install -g create React app and all that. But I think they actually removed the ability to do that for various reasons. So now npm is the npm command. npx is the command that says, hey, I want to run some npm command, but I don't want to install it locally first. I want you to like get it for me once and then run it. And it does smart caching and stuff, so it's not going to be a huge download every time. So I'm going to say create React app. And I haven't done this in a few weeks, so let's find out if it blows up. And I'm just going to create a new application, and that is going to be I don't know, what do I have? Gosh, nothing interesting. It's going to be a dice roller. It's not going to be a dice roller, but so it should go through and yes, install that. Great, thank you. Which will take a moment. And so here's where it's going to throw all of those files you were talking about. Mm. First, it's going to download all the packages it needs, and there are quite a few. Create React app. It basically works off of several things. It has this CRA template you can see here, and that's basically the default set of files that is going to bring down and modify and customize for you depending on what you call it and what kind of things you have set up. And it's going to grab you the basic React libraries and everything. And those all have tons and tons of dependencies, as we can see here. And we'll open up that node modules directory and poke through that and show what we got as soon as it's done. Great. You're going to see this. So let's see what's doing here. It's got all our dependencies. It's added 1,417 packages in 40 seconds. Not bad. Important here, you can tell it to not do this, but it will also initialize this as a Git repository. So if you look at it, if I go into the thing first, you'll see we have our .git file. So it has already made a Git directory for you, or a Git repository for you in there, a .git directory that shows it's a repository. So I always double check because I'm superstitious, but it should have a Git repo set up for you in there, initializing everything, and you can just add your remotes to that. This is something you will see pretty much anytime you do something with npm. Ignore it. It is lots of people have lots of opinions, and they mostly agree that it's a bad idea because it makes it feel like things are broken. They're not. They're just they're basically warnings to people who maintain and build those packages. Hey, please update your packages. It doesn't require any action from us at all. So if you see warnings or vulnerabilities in general, you can just ignore those. And yeah, it added and committed all the stuff. And now we've got all the basics here. So gives us the stuff we need to run it. What we are really concerned about is the npm start. So we should be able to do npm start and see if it comes up. There's our calendar, npm start. Let's see. So, great, cool. And it should give us a little spinny thing. So this is the default template that it's going to give you every time by default. There's ways of working that a little bit, but I don't think we're going to go into it today. So this has all those files to both make React work and show you these templates. So I'm going to open up code and show you what is in there. Great. So here's our node modules directory. It is grayed out because we have a get ignore file that says ignore that file. You never, ever, ever want to check in these because there's a billion files in there and they take up a lot of space. That's why we have npm. So we have those packages listed in the package JSON, the dependencies that it's going to install. When we do npm install, it's going to go grab all those, make sure you have the most updated ones. So make sure node modules is ignored so none has ever checked in. I made that mistake a bunch when I was just learning it and thought I was real smart and I was not. So cool. But let's take a look at the file. So it gives you a default README that has all the instructions on everything. I pretty much always get rid of all that stuff and just say, hey, this is going to be my dice roller app. It's a dice roller. Hooray. Cool. So let's look at what we have in here. So we have two directories. We have our public and our source. Public is what you'd expect to see in a regular web server. So these are files that unless React has a reason to render out a file, it will render these out by default. So our index.html is the thing that's always going to be our root there. If we want to put images in here, I usually put an image directory in here and move all my images that I want to use it in there. If I'm using fonts, I'll put them in there. Any sort of assets that aren't React code, I put in there. But this index.html is the where everything starts. So it's got some header stuff, and you probably want to change your title and everything in here. It's got so here's where we start some boilerplate stuff. Here's our public URL. These logos. These are the hey buddy, I guess not. These are the images that are going to show up in so like when it's installed on a mobile device or when it's installed on something else that needs these logos displayed, and that's where the manifest says, hey, if you have built this and are looking at this web app on a mobile device, use this for the little icon. In general, you can ignore these unless you're deploying it and want it to look fancy, then change those to be your your app's icons. Here is, I wonder why it's not showing me the pings. It should be showing me the pings. Could not register service workers. Huh, interesting. So walking through the index here. So this is where it's setting up these. I don't need to, but I'll generally delete these comments. They're the same every time. This is just saying this is the template. We can set our title here. And this is where everything always starts. So if we weren't serving this through React and just looked at this in a web browser, we would see an empty div here. What React does is when we hook it up, it says, hey, I want to create a new React root element. I'm going to grab that root element or the div with the ID of root in our index.html and basically render all of our React into that. Strict mode is just a nice thing to have. You should pretty much leave it alone. But the important thing is it's going to render this app component into our root. What does that mean? That means that it's going to, so let me take a step back. I don't know if they talk about this in lecture or in the labs or anything. This is, so let's look at app.js. Actually, let me think about this. Yeah, so this is not JavaScript. This is code that's going to be looked at and use the React libraries to get turned into JavaScript. If we just tried to put this into a JavaScript file, it would bomb out because it doesn't know what to do with angle brackets and all this stuff. Part of the installation and all that stuff of React is, I think it still uses Webpack, but basically it says, hey, we're going to have this batch of files. I'm going to look at these. I'm going to turn them into JavaScript files. So this is not JavaScript, right? This isn't JavaScript. This is React code that's going to be turned into JavaScript. It looks a lot like JavaScript, but we're running it because we know what JavaScript is. It's easier that way. So, and most of the time we can kind of just ignore that. Occasionally there'll be things like, oh, we need to use class name instead of class, or we need to use HTML4 instead of for. There's a couple little peculiarities. And that's just basically, and there's a few things that will come up when you're like, oh, this isn't working in JavaScript right. Well, it's not JavaScript, but it acts very much like JavaScript. So for the most part, we can imagine it's JavaScript. If it gives you guff, try to remember that it's not. One of the interesting things, or one of the fundamental things, is that this angle bracket app, that's our component here. That is basically saying, hey, look at the React file called app. Turn all this into JavaScript. It's going to turn into a function. And whatever this function returns, so we have this return here, render that in here, render that in here. So keeping in mind that we're not just kind of like smacking HTML together, because this looks just like HTML. That's not HTML, that's JSX. Keeping in mind that we are actually returning this value and rendering it into the component is going to help us when we hit use effect. It's going to help us when we start thinking about how state works, because this just feels like a JavaScript file, and it's not. It's running this function to create some stuff to render out to the component that's going to be put on the page. So, but we'll talk about all that when we talk about effects and state and all that. The important part is here, what is all this garbage? So this is the default template. It's got some styling in here in the CSS. It's got some styling in here, I think. Yeah, in two places. But this basically is the code that puts this on the screen. Unless you want your application to look like this, it is safe to just get rid of all that. Hey, great. And you see, this is a sans serif font. We've still got a little bit of styling in here, and that's because of the CSS. So number one thing, you can get rid of all that stuff that makes the spinny electron go, and the spinny atom to go. So this stuff is all good. I usually turn off web vitals because I don't really use it at all. If you take that out, just make sure to take this out, and vice versa. Basically, that's just doing some reporting that is not important to us at the moment. If you leave it in, it's not going to hurt anything. This logo SVG is not being used anymore, so we can delete that. We can delete that. This is not being used anymore. We can delete that. If you're not using tests, you can delete these testing files. I tend to leave them in the hopes that I will actually write tests, which I do occasionally. Recommended activity, not always followed up, but I leave them there just to remind me that I'm not doing it if I decide not to. And then there's these CSS files. So there's these the app CSS and index CSS. The difference between these is the index CSS getting loaded here? No, it's not. So in app CSS, also we can delete that logo from here. This is importing app CSS. So CSS in React has many different philosophies. My philosophy is the old and grumpy one. Is that I know CSS already. I'm probably just going to use CSS the way it is. There's styled components and all sorts of things. The main thing is that one of the prevailing thoughts is to keep your CSS kind of bound to the component that it affects. So if we have CSS that affects the app, we're going to have that in app CSS. And so this has all the stuff that does the setting up of the animation and all that stuff. If you're not using that default stuff, you can blow all that away and put what you like in there. I, being me, will generally put the skeleton CDN in here just to have that basic stuff in that is providing overall styling, which is what our index CSS is doing here. So the stuff in the index CSS is just kind of setting overall styles for things. So anything that's going to be everywhere, your basic fonts, if you have variables for sizes and colors, if you have a reset, anything like that, you probably want to put that in your index CSS. Usually, so my process is usually put skeleton in here to just get it looking nice to start off with, start fussing around, and then I'll eventually take the CSS out of the actual skeleton file because it's only a couple hundred lines. Take that out of here and drop it in index, or I'll make a skeleton CSS and link it from here. Import skeleton CSS. That's just my weird process. You don't have to follow it at all. Just know that in general, people are going to be looking for overall site styling in the index CSS that's linked up here. And then each component will generally have a CSS file attached with it. So if I have a navigation.js, I'll have a navigation.css. If I have a dropdown or shopping cart.js, I'll have a shopping cart CSS. And those will be imported up top, but not on.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Is that sort of like what Tailwind and stuff like that is like? You're kind of just attaching different files to specific parts of the web page type of thing.
So stuff like semantic and material and all that, those are Bootstrap. Those are like general libraries that you're going to be adding classes to your elements, and that's going to like provide kind of a framework. So you're probably not going to be importing them in each component. The things you want to import in each component are your styles that are particular to that component.
Okay.
Whether it's CSS or you're using styled components, which I don't like.
So it's not. You're saying it's not kind of the similar idea that you're describing of using CSS
those are,
to a component.
More,
it's not like that.
Yeah, those are more overall things, and
okay.
ones in your component CSS should be like specific to that component.
Okay.
I hate Tailwind. I don't like it. I think it's a bad philosophy, and I'm happy to talk about why at length later.
Okay.
If you want to use it, it's got an easy on ramp. It's easy to do stuff up front. I think it enforces a lot of bad patterns that make code difficult to work with and maintain after a month, say, or if you're on a team. But yeah, rant for another time. Short version, do CSS like you would for a JavaScript app now, whether it's using a framework. And if you have styling that you want to add by hand, put it in a CSS file that's attached to your component. And that's more or less it for structure stuff. Node modules, those are going to be there forever, and will get bigger as you add more stuff to it. All the public stuff, if you don't want these, you can take these out and then take them out of your JSON here, your manifest. I leave them in and replace them when I feel like it's time to make an icon for my application. We know about robots.txt, right? If we don't, robots.txt is for web crawlers that tells it, hey, look at this site or don't, look at these parts of the site or don't. By default, the React one is open, which in general you want because you want search engines to find your site. And the favicon is the, of course, the little weird formatted thing that shows up in the corner here when you look at it in a browser. And I usually make that when I've built enough to decide that I want an icon for my app as well. And yeah, that's more or less it. There's a lot of stuff to talk about with package JSON with npm, but that's kind of like I think that's for a little bit later, maybe. It might just be confusing now, but yeah, basically you don't need to touch the package JSON to start off with. And yeah, that's more or less it. So what can I clarify there? What can I talk about more, or what other questions do you have?
In the index .html file, I see a line that says no script, you need to enable JavaScript to run this app. Could you tell me what the significance of that line is? Is that something that's generally just removed or stays in there? Or
yeah, you generally don't need it, but it's in there for completeness. React runs on JavaScript. So if you don't have a JavaScript, you're not going to be able to use React. NoScript is a tag that it's a standard HTML tag, and you can put it in any HTML page that says, hey, if this page doesn't have JavaScript, show this text or show this whatever's inside it. So this basically just says, if they don't have a JavaScript, that is all they're going to see. And that if for some reason they have JavaScript turned off, or they're using a browser that doesn't have JavaScript, or this is falling through a time hole and in back to 1995, they will see that. And they'll be like, I need to turn on my JavaScript if I want to use this application, unlike the entire rest of the web. Yeah, Eric.
I do notice that for this specifically, the way that the index.js works is that it finds the element with an ID of root. And then in the index.html, the element with an ID of root is a div that's a child of the body.
Yes.
Could we just set the body to have an ID of root and then build off of that? Or is it, considered good practices to have a child div like this?
You could. I don't think there's any reason you couldn't do that. We can do that right now. Take that out. So I'm going to do this, and I believe it's going to work. And if not, yeah, great. That works fine. Change the text here to verify. Hey, React. Great. So let me talk a little bit about what this does. So get element by ID root, we know what that does. It gets us that element. And this has changed from recent versions of React, but it does basically the same thing. The syntax is just a little bit different. Basically, it's saying, grab that element. That's going to be the root of our React application. And then into that root, we're going to render whatever we put here. So here's the thing, right? We are not telling it, make the whole page the thing. We are saying, grab the element with the ID of root in it. So if we had, div, here's a div with stuff. And then we had a, a paragraph tag with an ID of root. It's going to grab that paragraph tag. And so this part here that says, hey, React, that's your React application. This is just HTML. This is just sitting in the HTML, and it is outside of the application, and the application can't touch it. Why would you ever want to do that? Generally, you don't. But what it tells us is that we are rendering the HTML created by our React application into an element of our choosing. So we could build out an HTML page with like whatever stuff on it we wanted, and just like the React app could just be a panel that displayed the weather or something. The React app doesn't have to be the whole page. It can just be in an element somewhere. So sure, we can put it in the body. General general practices in putting in a div like we had here. I think it's just to kind of like keep it a little bit more flexible in case we want to, you know, put a little bit of something outside for some reason. I almost never change this part of the HTML. The other thing this lets us do is style the body a little bit. So if we want to, put some margins on the body so the React app is contained in the middle or anything like that, that gives us a little bit of wiggle room styling wise. But yeah, in general, as long as it's on the page, it could be in the body. It's just, you're going to see it in a div like this pretty much 99% of the time. Did that get what you're asking?
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah. And again, just to like kind of, a lot of this feels like magic because we kind of do a thing and it works, but demystifying it, like for me at least, de-stresses it a lot. Like, oh, it's just doing this dumb thing. It's all this index or app is, it's just a function that generates HTML and puts it in another element. Okay, cool. I can do that. But also it helps with debugging. So if like something does go wrong, you've got to, I've got root instead of root, and all of a sudden my React app isn't working at all, and I don't know why, and it's not throwing me any errors. It's good to know the basics of just how it's hooked up to help with that debugging stuff. Marcus, did you have a question?
Oh, I did, but I kind of forgot what it was. It might have even just as you were talking kind of became clear. Yeah, I don't remember what I was going to ask.
Cool.
I also didn't remember my hand was up.
Yeah, I will often
do one thing. General idea is to pull apart components so that you essentially aren't ending up with like how we were doing in vanilla JavaScript, where as you grow the page in complexity, you're ending up with 5 miles of code you got to search up and down for. Yeah. This is the whole idea, is to break apart and be able to just pull from different files.
Yeah.
That become the components of the page.
Yeah. So the philosophy is, it's kind of like looking at the wireframes that we did for the projects in phase one. It's looking at the page as, boxes within boxes within boxes. There's, we can structure this page by looking at various levels of granularity. Like, oh, it's got a body and a header and a side column. Great. I can make a component for each one of those things. Oh, the header has a navigation drop down and a login button, and this thing here. The sidebar is broken into this category and a blog roll or whatever else. The body is divided into a shopping cart and the product display and the customer support thing. So, and we can dive into each one of those. The shopping cart has a shopping icon and a display of how many things are in the cart and a list of things that are in the cart. We can dive into each one of those list items and say, oh, it's got a thumbnail of the product and a price and a label or whatever. And then we can zoom back out and look at the whole thing at the granular need. So that lets us, the big thing there is it lets us think about applications more easily, because we can break it into parts that, while we hook them up in different ways, kind of conceptually they are distinct. So we build a product display component and it sits on the page here, and then we're like, oh, actually it would look better on over here, or there should be one on another page, or we can use this same card to display things in different places. And so we can think about just what that component looks like and design inside that, and then that's just a Lego block that we can stick in wherever it's needed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And so that way kind of like you were saying with the JavaScript app, if we're working on just this, user info display card, we can think about just that and not worry about anything outside of it. We're going to get some information through props, which you're going to see now if you haven't already. So basically, it's basically a function that's saying, hey, give me some information, and I'm going to render out some HTML that looks like this. And the only thing I need to worry about is just like breaking things into functions. The only thing I need to worry about is what this one component, this function generates. And then that's just a block I can use somewhere else. And I don't have to think about how that fits into the whole application or what globals it's hitting or what other functions it's calling somewhere else. I can think about just that one thing, clear my mind of everything else. The whole application could be a billion lines of code. I just need to worry about this one file right now.
So like with something like you were, I think you mentioned, like you have a button and then there might be, or like a login button. Inside of that, there's components to the login button, but those can be isolated and like make a tree so that the button lives up at the top, and then you're making a file structure just for what overall equates to a button. But there's things that it's doing and that you can pull data from other places or whatever using returning imported shit from other places, lack of a better articulate way to say it.
And so here's a dirty secret about JSX. This thing that we're looking at right here, this looks like HTML, but it's not. This is JSX. This is not a div tag. This is roughly, details are a little bit different, but roughly, this is a component named div that renders stuff out inside of it. This is a component named img that looks at this JSX and renders out an image HTML element. These are not tags. These are functions. These are all functions. And they, just for our convenience, look like tags. But these are components that are ultimately functions that return an A tag with these parameters and this thing. This returns an image tag, and it looks at whatever this is and puts that in the source of the image tag when it returns that HTML for us. So this is a really nice abstraction, and I love it. It's always good to go back and remember that these are not tags. These are not elements. These are functions that return HTML. And so just like, if we have a div that has, the user info in it in HTML, same thing. We can take that div and move it around. It just happens this div is actually a function that returns a div, and we can use that block anywhere we want. It's just the basic HTML tags are built into React, and the underneath is just a little bit different, but that's essentially the deal.
Cool.
And that's why we can use curly brackets in them.
That's helpful. Yeah. Awesome.
Cool. What else can I rant about? Anyone have any other questions about the basic setup here, or anything outside of this that they want some clarification on? Feeling good so far? Great. Me too. Cool. So that's the basics. Going through the default setup of Create React App is actually going to teach you a lot about the way your app is going to behave in certain ways. So play around with it. It's, you can make one in 48 seconds or whatever it is. Pull stuff out, change stuff, break it. It doesn't matter. If something happens, blow it away and make a new one. It's a really good way to learn what different pieces do and what you can do with them. So yeah, pull it apart and flex it up and find out. Yeah, Marcus.
When you went through the excruciating 48 seconds of creating that, you mentioned that you can have it not create a repo. Is that, is it worth, if you're just experimenting with it, to have it not do that, just so it's just living locally and it would never.
Well, it's still living locally because remember, a Git repo is just a collection of changes in a directory. Until you attach it to a remote, it's just on your local machine anyway. So
Oh, okay.
you can throw a, I think it's no Git or no, it's a flag you can put on there,
Oh, okay.
but it takes 100 milliseconds or whatever. So it's probably more time to type out the flag than to not do
Okay.
it.
Okay. Cool.
Cool. Anything else? Yeah, Gabby.
I did have a question about NPM stuff because I feel like every time it's been kind of confusing, and I thought I set my machine to like automatically use version 16 because it seems like that's the one that most of our labs are working with, but then I still have to change it every time because it like automatically goes back to version 18 or 19 or whatever.
So let's see. I'm on 8.
Are you on WSL or Mac?
Mac.
Oh, never mind. I had that problem with Windows, and I was able to solve it, but I don't know if it was the same. If it'll be the same thing. I would say check in your root directory if you have a bash RC file and a profile file. Because in my situation, I had put in settings into the bash RC file to automatically load npm and npm, but it was because I had a profile file, it was automatically reading the profile and not the bash RC, so I had to delete the profile in order to get to read the bash RC. So I don't know, it worked for me, so maybe it works for you.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I recently moved machines, and the machine has had like a bash RC, a bash profile, a dot profile, dot zhsrc, I think one more, and there was different configs in each of them. So at the top of each one, I just said like echo, I'm in this file, echo, I'm in this file, so I knew which ones were running, and I got them all just like all in one. I think it's bash profile right now. And so got all my like npm configuration and Python stuff and Ruby stuff and everything in one file. So I know, and it's easy to, some things we'll want to install in different places. So it's just a good little hygiene thing to take a look through your starter files every once in a while. And especially if something's not working, like your path isn't being set right or your npm root or something. Yeah, it definitely teaches you some Unix skills going through that, which in the long term is great. In the short term, extremely frustrating.
Cool.
Cool. Anything else? Awesome. I'll post this video in the usual places. Feel free to hit me up anytime at all with any questions about this stuff. And yeah, lecture will be shortly. So I'll see y'all later on. Thanks for hanging out.